Okay, so this morning at beautiful Ahika, we're going to teach you one of the most productive strategies that you can use in the home garden or on a larger scale in the farm. And this involves repopulating our soils with the beneficial organisms that fix nitrogen from the atmosphere, that solubilize minerals in the soil, that produce a whole range of substances that stimulate plant immunity so that we don't have to worry about chemicals and so forth on our food. And this involves something called making a compost tea. What we're doing essentially is taking compost, which is rich in all of these beneficial microorganisms, and taking a small amount of it, adding some oxygen, adding some water and adding some food, and that generates these organisms to begin breeding. And when they breed quite quickly. Every 20 minutes they subdivide, and so in a 24-hour brewing process, which is what's involved here, we're going to have trillions and trillions of organisms in this little bucket where we're about to make our compost tea. So first off, we've got to have some water. If you live in town, it's going to be chlorinated water, and that's a problem because the chlorine, just like it affects the organisms in your gut, will affect the beneficial organisms in the soil. So if it is chlorinated water and you can't get tank water, then you've got to bubble the chlorine off. So what we're going to use to provide our oxygen source is a very simple and inexpensive fish tank aerator. Now I'll just turn this on. I think it might already be on. There it is. You need one with two outlets. You can see the dual outlets because that delivers, we need to deliver enough oxygen to satisfy the quite huge oxygen requirements of these organisms as they breed and breed and breed. But initially we're going to take these two little air stones, they're called, and we're going to drop them into the tank, and you can have a look and see what happens when I do that. Can you see the water bubbling? And if we had chlorine in this water, we would leave that water bubbling for 30 or 40 minutes until there's no smell coming off. That's called off-gassing the chlorine. And so 30 minutes, normally there'll be no chlorine smell, and then we can begin this process of making a compost tea. Now the first ingredient in our compost tea is a good compost, and we're going to use a very special worm compost. You can see here that we use at Ahika here, and we're going to put about that kind of amount, a couple of handfuls. For this size 10-litre bucket, we're going to put about that kind of amount. That's our starter. That contains maybe 30,000 different species of organisms that we're now going to feed and aerate. So we've got the oxygen working, we've got our compost in the container, and now we need a food source. Now first off, we've got a bit of a bee in there, but first off, we're going to make sure I don't get stung here. Bees come back for his honey. This is some honey from Ahika. Now you could feed just a little bit of sugar, but we're going to treat them with a little bit of this delicious honey off our farm, and we put just a bit of honey in there. It's not a huge amount, about that amount, and there's a bee come back in here to get some of his honey, and then we're going to take the other two food sources. Some seaweed, some liquid seaweed, about 100 mils, and this has got a marker on it, this particular container, so we'll put our 100 mils in. And we're going to put a little bit, if we had some fish fertilizer, that's the ideal. We don't have, so we're going to use some liquid blood and bone, and you can see the sort of amounts. It can be quite, you can just choose how much you want to put in, but you can see the sort of amounts that are involved. And now we've got the ingredients. We've got the food. The food for microbes is no different than the food for humans. They want sugar, protein, or they want carbohydrates, protein and fats. And so we've got a little bit of all of those things in the blood and bone and the kelpin and the honey, maybe a little lacking on the fat side. Fish normally would have the oil component, but this will be fine to provide a food source along with the oxygen to get these guys really going. We'll have a bucket full. 24 hours later, this will be bubbling more than what the air is doing. There'll be a froth on the top of it, and it'll be filled with beneficial microbes. We can put in a watering can, sieve off the compost, and now we've got this wonderful thing called compost tea to regenerate our soils and really produce some beautiful food with forgotten flavours and extended shelf life and no need for chemicals.